Tēnā koe, Ihirangi, me ngā mihi kia koe e lani o reo karakia hei whakawātea tō tātou nei kōrero I te ata nei, ngā mihi. Ngā mihi hoki kia koutou, ngā reo, ngā mana o ngā mautere o Aotearoa nei, ko tāmai, kei te tautoko tēnei hoi nei kaupapa nunui. Tēnō mahi, tēnō rangatira tēnei mahi. Nō reira, koutou ngā kai whakahaere, Ihirangi, Kiwa, koutou ngā tekis, kei muri rā, tēnei toku nei mahi kia koutou katoa hoki. So thank you for your very warm introduction, and we certainly really enjoyed the kōrero yesterday. It was like, there's something special about being in a room where people are of a like mind. And it gives us kind of comfort that we're not alone screaming in the wilderness, because quite often we choose to work in places where people are not convinced of the problems or the solutions and don't share the analysis. So we go into those spaces which sometimes are quite hostile to what we're trying to do, because we believe that's where transformation needs to occur, away from the negative behaviours that are impacting upon us. And so it's a relief sometimes when you come out of those hostile places and into a room like we did yesterday, where people are of a like mind and they're all on a similar kaupapa. So thank you very much for creating that opportunity for us. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to try and crack through a bunch of slides for you, in terms of the kaupapa that I'm being asked to talk about. Now, has that gone up all right, Ihirangi? Okay, so I'd like to begin with a quote from one of my favourite philosophers, a famous philosopher from Taranaki. And she said the other day, "We like to see where things have come from, to see the root causes that contextualise and visualise the pathway from the problem to the solution." And this is one aspect of whakapapa. And that's from Hineka Mako, your kazi sisi whanaunga from Taranaki Whanganui. And I don't think she was trying to be particularly eloquent that morning, no more than normal. And so she turned around, and this is what she said to me. So I said, "Oh, that's really profound. I'm going to steal your kōrero, and that's going to be my opening comments." But in preparation for this hui, we were all asked the question, who was your greatest influence in regard to this mahi? And I replied, well, it was my mum, as did many of us. It was quite interesting when that question came up, Ihirangi, when you asked that question, and lots of people answered their mum. So it's no surprise, I guess, that there are so many wahine that are leading this kaupapa. It seems like it's been that way mai rano. And so that was a good thing to reinforce. So it was my mum who initiated me into growing kai in the early 60s. And one of my jobs was looking after both the gardens and the chooks. And so in that sense, I'm going to get my screen to keep moving. And so there we are in the 1960s, gardening away. And I was the chicken boy. One of my jobs was to look after the chooks. So I had to get up every morning and get the kai for the chooks and feed them, collect the eggs, bring them back in for parakuhi. So I've got an endearing love for chickens from that day to this. But by the 1970s, I'd graduated from being a chicken boy and started working in orchards. So this is a very blurry photo back from the 1970s, before we all had flash phones and we could take pictures. It's one of the few pictures of this organic orchard that we helped establish. It was around about 1972, 73. And it was one of the first organic orchards, certainly in in this region, that we got, and it's still going today. in the 1980s, we got into not-for-profit kai distribution by forming food cooperatives in the low-income state housing areas that we were living at that time. So we wanted to distribute our kai, so we used to round up all the whānaus and come together one day a week, and we'd start distributing kai. Do you remember these? This is kind of showing my age. These are called clean sacks. And some of you might remember these. These were the large paper sacks that were used before plastic rubbish bags came online. And we distributed over 100 of these every week, containing a basic range of veggies at a cost of $5 per bag. And so this became a point of social organisation for us when we met on various people's front lawns, and everybody bought a clean sack and we distributed it out to kai. And so that was an early form of organisation. So after a while, we decided to get back into the production of kai, and so we got a 100-acre property on a peppercorn rental. I think we were paying $1 a year, and we started a 10-acre garden that began producing kai for our distribution co-op, and which also supplied a number of community organisations like the Aotearoa-New Zealand network of halfway houses that were organised by our fire Betty Walk, there's Betty there, along with other community-based organisations and events, including the 1984 Hikoi to Waitangi, where I think we contributed 2 truckloads of kai for that hikoi as it made its way through the Taitokoro. So it was during this period that we became more and more conscientised to the structural injustices within our society during the 80s, and which had resulted in the historical oppression of our peoples. So by the mid-80s, we had transformed into full-time activists, and we spent less time in the gardens and more time at the barricades, it seemed. And but because we still wanted to be gardeners, we became guerrilla gardeners, initiating projects wherever we found ourselves amongst friends and whānau, which we do to this day. We turn up and kind of crank gardens out if we're there for a week or two. Our philosophy was Guerilla Gardens, and you might recognise this. This is your sister's backyard in Tamaki Nui Arua, where we're smashing out some raised bed gardens, and it's my tama there, Rangi Whero. This was in the early stage, so we'd kind of wrecked the place, aroha mai ana, but it's looking a lot nicer now because we've resown the grass and planted some trees. But and it's something that we enjoy doing. So I'm really pleased that this tradition is carried on within my children, of planting gardens from a young age. So let's cast our minds back. So that's just some of the personal contextualisation of my history in terms of working the whenua. But let's go back even further to when things really started going wrong, and we heard a lot of really beautiful kōrero yesterday about how things were for our tūpono and our various tikanga around Marakai. But things went really wrong for us, the tainga mai o rātou ngā tauiwi kei Wānanga mātou, and things started to go a bit wee wawa, and we all know that. And so from what was happening in the world during that time, so between 1817 and 1914, you had the Industrial Revolution. And this is where Europeans sought to capture the wealth and resources of the world. And they spread all over the world. And here's a map of how things looked like by 1922. So those brown areas, parts of the world that were controlled by Europeans, and that slightly different shade, like South America and North America, the areas that were controlled by European settlers. And the blue areas were the rest of the whenua that wasn't controlled by non-Europeans. So as you can see, there was this massive expansionism of imperialism, colonization, that sought to basically take our resources, including our people, enslaving indigenous populations. So we're all familiar with what happened in various parts of the world with the enslaving of the iwi take of various lands, including in the Pacific, and the blackbirding that went on as they kidnapped populations from our various whananga Moutere in the Pacific and enslaved them as well. So here we are stuck in a colonised framework where success is measured in many ways that Takahi, the Māori of Papatuanuku, Ranginui, Tangaroa and Hene Moana. We've inherited the system of exploitation and extraction, and that's its whakapapa, and it contextualises why we're in the situation that we're in today, and it also informs us about how these destructive practices have led the world that we live in to almost to the point of what's been called the 6th global extinction event. And as every year a staggering amount of life forms are driven into extinction. And so it's my kōrero to that if we do not confront these systematic historical root causes of the problem, then all of our hopes and dreams of a better world will come to nothing. So it's not just a case of building the good, but because the good isn't being built fast enough to overcome the bad. So we've got to stop the bad and while we're building the good as well. So we need to uplift. It's almost like we've got to weed the gardens and let the sunlight in order for our puawaitanga to occur. So what did it look like here? Well, we began with the seals and the whales, as we know, and they were all wiped out pretty much. Then it went to the land, and of course we were an impediment to the land being conquered, and so there was warfare in a lot of areas, and it's no surprise that the most fertile land was the land that was confiscated. The Waikato River basins around Taranaki Maunga, those lands around Tūhoe, those are the places where war was brought to drive the people from the lands. And we can see how those lands diminished, and we're all familiar with that story. And that's why a lot of us, we'd love to be gardeners, but the missing part of the question is, where's our whenua? So that's one of the fundamental questions, of course, that we must address. In terms of our wāku, our ngāhere, of course, as part of that time, we saw our native forests just dwindle and dwindle and dwindle. And one of the ways it was achieved was by burning. And they say that in the early part of the last century, basically Aotearoa was on fire from one end to the other, and you could see smoke, right across the horizon for a number of years, every day. And so this was the birth of the agricultural system that we know now. It's when the farmers took over, and so this is what Taranaki looked like at that time, as they ravaged the forests and kicked the people off and made war on the whānaus there, and then they ravaged the land in terms of the forest, wanting to turn that into pasture. And so there was the great burning that occurred, and you can see where the burning stopped from this aerial picture. And so that's the bush that surrounds the maunga, and you can actually see quite graphically that's where the burning stopped. And so what we got instead was this agricultural model, pastoral farming, turning the land into grass, and that's developed into really intensive industrial agriculture, and I think Heneka is going to touch on that in her presentation a bit later on. So in terms of greenhouse gases, well, this whole system, the systematic way of extraction, has caused immense problems to our atmosphere, and 48% of it has come from the agricultural industry, and you can see the breakdown there. Dairy cattle 22%, sheep 12%, beef 8.1%, others. The other big area is transport on the bottom left hand corner. So this is the root causes and the results of this type of activity that is, as I said, leading us to the 6th global extinction event. We know, because we measure the gases with the assistance of the Takiwā platform. I think Mike Taitoko, who's leading that, will be speaking as part of this hui. But here we can see in those colours, the purpley and the red colours, this is where the majority of emissions come from, and it's no surprise they come from the largest city, Auckland, and the biggest dairying in the area, which is Waikato. And so this is where 13,000 kilotons of carbon dioxide and equivalents are pumped up into our atmosphere. Likewise, second largest city, Christchurch, and second largest dairy industry land down there in Ōtautahi, or Canterbury as it's known. So these are the regions that are causing the most problems, and so we've got to take action in terms of transforming the activity of that agricultural sector away from what they're doing and more into plant-based food systems, which is what we're here to talk about, because it's plant-based food systems that are going to be the future for us going forward. So, but it just didn't stop with pillaging the top of the land. The extractive economy then turned its sights to what's under the land. And these are the mineral permits that are currently active around our country, and gold mining, coal mining, fossicking, you name it, it's happening. And once again, unfortunately for our whānau in Taranaki, you've become the energy sacrifice zone for the motu. And so you've got the dual problem of not only raupatu, but then the subsequent pastoral farming and its impacts upon the land, the creation of the chemicals required to support that industry, poisoning. Then you've got the all the oil and extraction and fracking on your whenua. So guys are copying it, as we all are. But living with a wahine from Taranaki, I'm reminded every day when I wake up, okay, Mike, your job is to battle the evil and work, to help sort the situation out. And then the latest extractive industry, of course, is water. And these are some of the water consents that have been issued, that are being exported overseas at the moment. And in a drought-challenged world, where global warming is occurring, the last thing we need to be doing is, number one, polluting our water, which the agriculture industry has just about killed every awa in the country. And if we don't have fresh water, well, ka mate noa, hore kau he wai, ka mate noa. And so all our gardens, all our life, all our animals, everything, if we don't have clean water. So one of the consequences of this activity, this current economic activity, is to destroy the very essence of what gives us life. So now we get to down to tin tacks. So what we've inherited from this colonization and imperialism is a worldview that's based on consumerism and a colonial mindset. That's the worldview of the system that we live in today. Its attitudes to resources is to extract them, to dig, to burn, to dump. And those are the characteristics of this extractive industry. In terms of how it exploits people, well, you can see in the middle there that we're just in the cogs that are driving, and we're expected to keep the machine going as exploited workforces within that machinery of the extractive economy. The purpose of all this activity on the right is the enclosure of wealth and power. And so all of this happens so that, well, it used to be people back in Europe, and it still is to a large degree, but transnational companies and their shareholders get all the wealth from this activity. And for those of us that have been marginalised, well, we suffer more polarisation between rich and poor, increasing homelessness, food insecurity, kids going to school without kai and all those sorts of things that beset us. So the governance, how this is all controlled, is by finance. And so we're nearly there. So what we're trying to construct at the moment is the Rawater framework, which is based on whakapapa, mai te timatatanga, mai te kore, eke mai, taino ki tēnei wā, the interconnectedness of everything that we know, that our tūpunas have told us, the te ao tūroa, and all those things that keep us alive from the natural world, our mai te kaitiakitanga o tō tātou atua, and how we must respect the tapu and the mauri of that realm, that we have to work together in cooperation, and that the whole purpose of this activity is whenua ora, tangata ora, mauri ora, and that's the outcome, and that's what we're looking for. And so it requires rangatiratanga, that we all mahi tahi in some form of deep democracy. So what we're involved in at the moment is trying to shift our people from that orange world into the blue world. And we need to use and organise and use our collective strength to overcome all these obstacles to shift the framework. And which you all, I know I'm preaching to the converted. I spend less time preaching to the converted than I do preaching to the unconverted. But it's a hard business. We've chosen to work within the National Iwi Chairs Forum because this is where Māori governance groups come together 4 times a year. And many of these organisations are key to making decisions required to transform our communities. But we need your help. They're not on the kaupapa in the same way that you fellas are. And so sometimes we find ourselves a little bit out on a brunch, out on a limb, as it were. And so I'm really hoping that this movement will, I know that you are. But we need your help in these spaces because ultimately our iwi governance groups are accountable to the people. And if they're not going hard and fast enough, we've got to create the incentives for them to do that. Anyway, ka nui mo tēnei wā, I just wanted to lay that down as a whāriki kōrero about the transformative nature, how important it is that we do that, how incredibly important that your work is, because you're actually putting into place and living all of this. But we've got to broaden that message out wider than this rōpū and take that message right into the heart of where power resides, whether or not it's Māori power or Pākehā power. We have to go there and get them to put their shoulders to the wheel, to mahi tai, to whakapiripiri ki tēnei wēnei kaupapa, and to each other. Anyway, ka nui mo tēnei wā, ngā mihi nunui ki a koutou katoa, hei whakarongo ki ngā aurere tanga o te tangata nei, nō reira ngā mihi.